This year's award winner, so how am I going to do this? We're going to have an introduction. So give it up not to the award winner, but to our introducer, Pam Wilcox from the Pennsylvania State University.
Good evening. Darrell was making us all nervous and was hiding for a while. We didn't know if he had showed up. It is my honor to introduce the 2023 Edwin H. Sutherland Award winner, my Penn State colleague, Dr. Darrell Steffensmeier, and ASC fellow since 1996. Now, it was requested that I keep this very brief for good reason. I know there are a lot of hungry people in the audience, and I want to leave Darrell plenty of time. Those of you who know him are well aware that he has plenty to say. And in fact, Darrell has had plenty to say for a very long time, and often very impactful things to say. He has a record of influential scholarship that spans 5 decades. He's far too prolific a scholar to summarize his work in just a few minutes. I can't do it justice. But what I thought I would do is just provide one example per decade of some of his many seminal contributions. So we're going to start in the 1970s. Early in his career in 1973, he published an article with Robert Terry in Social Forces. It was a groundbreaking observational field study of reactions to deviance. There were rigged shoplifting events involving experimental manipulation of variables, which was very uncommon at the time, and they were enacted in the presence of shoplifters, or store customers, who were in the position to observe and react to the shoplifting incidents. This, as I said, was groundbreaking methodology as well as groundbreaking substantively, and it was an award-winning piece of research. A little over a decade later, he published the well-known book, The Fence, In a Shadow of Two Worlds. There he provided, as many of you know, the case study of the world of Sam Goodman, The Fence, and those who did business with Sam. The Fence received the 1987 Award of Outstanding Scholarship from the Crime and Delinquency Division of SSSP, and it's widely considered a classic in the field. Excuse me. Into the 1990s. In the 1990s, Darrell developed with colleagues John Kramer and Jeff Ulmer an integrative theoretical framework known as the focal concerns of sentencing. The focal concerns perspective has, in fact, become the predominant conceptual framework used in sentencing and criminal justice decision-making research. Moving on to the next decade. In 2007, he and Jeff Ulmer's follow-up monograph to The Fence, entitled Confessions of a Dying Thief, won ASC's very prestigious Michael J. Hindeling Outstanding Book Award. The following decade, he won ASC's prestigious Joan Peter Celia Outstanding Article Award, not just once, but twice, in 2012 and again in 2019, and this was for work testing the racial invariance thesis and work on the cross-national comparison of the age crime curve. So that brings us to the current decade where Darrell is still going strong. I'm going to let a few more years in the 2020s pass before I pinpoint a seminal contribution, because I think there are more to come. It's just overall I can say he's a prodigious scholar who's contributed numerous landmark studies over the course of his career. In the process, he has made what I hope is obvious, very important contributions in terms of providing some of the most widely known ethnographies on offenders, developing new theoretical perspectives. I mentioned the focal concerns theory, but there's also Darrell's gendered theory of offending and his actor-centered criminal opportunity theory. He's provided impactful testing of racial invariance and age invariance theories. He has substantially advanced comparative cross-national research. And while I didn't mention it as one of the examples in my one per decade, I would be remiss if I also did not stress that he has produced numerous authoritative studies of women's trends in crime. So based on Darrell's sustained productivity, the impact of specific works, and contributions that cut across an impressive swath of methodologies and substantive areas in our discipline, he is richly deserving of this award. To that end, please join me in a big, loud round of applause for Darrell Steffensmeier.
And this, and then I'll put it back down. Congratulations.
Oh, I do this.
Quick photograph.
I see, okay. Is this yours?
Oh, yes.
Jesse will be, you're going to do it. Okay, you can do it from there, okay. Is it ready? Oh, okay. Oh, there we are, thank you. Thank you, thank you. It's, I'm very happy to be here. And I got a new sport coat, a new shirt. Abby made me do that, those of you that know Abby. I want to thank, I guess, lots of people, but thank Pam, first of all, for the, for the kind comments. My colleagues in criminology as a whole, colleagues, including graduate students at Penn State, and especially, I suppose, in some ways, grad students I've worked with, published with, and learned a ton from over many years. And thank my family, especially Abby and Emily. And I also want to thank Jesse for creating the PowerPoints and managing them. I hate PowerPoint. I struggle with it mightily. I kept messing it up. And I got a new computer too, so it was pretty tough couple of weeks, as Jesse knows. And I'll never use it again after these meetings are over. I'm in 3 sessions tomorrow, and that's it with PowerPoint, okay? So I have the talk. It's the Sutherland address. And so there's 9 statements in the theory, as you know, and so 9 wishes. Sutherland's projections. I suppose I have something to do with those, but they're Sutherland's. And if you think of who are the big gods of criminology in the 20th century, I think there are 4, and I think these are the 4. And I met all of them at the University of Iowa, and a gift which has never stopped giving in many ways because of my exposure there. I had no undergraduate sociology, and a lot of philosophy, history, psychology, different things, and thought about law school, applied, PhD in history or philosophy, applied, and then read a great book on sociology. It wasn't The Lonely Crowd by Reisman, and fell in love, came to Penn State, and my enthusiasm, I think, for sociology and now criminology has stayed, I think. Sutherland, I put up here, I'm not going to read these, defender of social context, as all of you know, and maybe sometimes he was overly strong. He did not reject biology, if you read him carefully, but he was a very strong defender of the social and saw that as his task. That comes up later when we talk about some things that I wish we had Sutherland back so that my colleagues and others could address it. I wished I might someday have a chance to study the many things he did. And to some extent, I've had a pretty good crack at it. So that's looking back, okay? The next one, Robert Merton. And always think of Merton as a forest into trees, getting at the core of things. I think of him as trees nuance, and every time you go back and read him, including anatomy theory, there's a lot of nuance to it, a lot of nuance I think that is missed. So I think of Merton as sort of wisdom and balance. Balance, if you think of biology and sociology, and so on. You just go through this there. And then, in many ways, for me, the most important God was Leonard. And I'm sure Shad would agree with this. But the most diverse, the most familiar with readings in other areas, did unbelievable research, intellectual God of labeling, without doubt, high relevance and revival today. If you go back and read his 1951 Social Pathology, and you think I read it probably almost parts of it almost every year, and I'm amazed that, my gosh, I didn't see that before. Or I was thinking about this, and that son of a gun says it in a way which makes sense and usable. And the last one, Travis Hershey, this is the only one I got to know personally, okay? And he was a rising star in the 60s for a number of reasons, but especially, of course, his 1969 book, which you all know about. He was a big fan of Durkheim, so if you want to understand Hershey, you have to read Durkheim. And a contrasting persona, as many of you know from his writings and so on. Was an acquaintance, friend, colleague, very congenial and so on. As an adversary, pretty tough. And so you know that maybe some surprise, because I wrote an article in 1989 that Travis was not very happy with, and he wrote a pretty nasty commentary to it. I even got a letter from Jackson Tobey, who was one of the pretty big figure at that time. And Jackson Tobey said, he says, Travis was way out of line. He says, I hope you'll hang in there. And you're right, and he's wrong. And so I've kept that letter, okay? But I actually corresponded, we didn't have email then, so snail mail, with Hershey in about 1980, 81. And he was working on the age crime stuff, and he was very encouraging. And we have met often at ASC meetings. Miles is here with me tonight, and he remembers when he and I and Hershey were at the bar for a couple of drinks for about 2 hours. So he was a very entertaining guy with a big persona and so on. So anyway, let's turn to the next one, 9 wishes. And we're not going to get through all of these, so keep that in mind. Take a long time, but there will be the Sutherland Address article that comes out. So there's 9 wishes, and the focus is going to be the first 3 and then number 9. And there's a lot of intertwining of these, especially cross-national. They all have that general theme. So there they are, and we'll begin with the cross-national. We'll put it up here, the changing world we live in. And this is a map, focuses on Africa really, but just many, many powerful changes going on, as you know, in many ways. Things of technology, information, the cyber, online, artificial intelligence, but also weapons, firepower, population shifts that are taking place. Much of the world, some of the world's getting much older, but other parts are much younger. The African countries are much, much younger. So there's tremendous that's going on. And that's kind of going to be the theme. So what's the importance? And I want to say it's important now, not just down the road. And so it's important on criminal offending and victimization, our crucial dependent variable. And all politics is local, we hear, And sometimes we think all crime is local. And I know with graduate students, when I ask about should we cover cross-national, spend a couple of seminars, not necessarily a lot of enthusiasm. Well, the cross-national, transnational crime is coming home to roost. And so you can't, crime is local will work less, I think. Teaching mission, which I think is a huge part of my life. I'm sometimes asked, what did you get more satisfaction from, the teaching or the research? I've often said the teaching, and in a lot of ways. So teaching, but just our relevancy and our responsibility to students to be, I think, more in tune with the rest of the world and get a good flavor of the cross-national for whatever areas you're looking at. Then the big one is the science of criminology, designing, explaining, and so on. And so the next slide puts up two quotes, Bernstein and Wilson. Somebody looked at that and said, oh, Bernstein and Wilson. Well, they're actually pretty good, but it's a great quote. It's from really Durkheim. But I highlighted here, to get beyond American or English or European, is that really cross-national? And must look at more than one particular brand of culture. Then Braithwaite has a pretty stinging statement there, and he comes right out on it. And I just look at the end there. We must revise theories of crime from those dished up by Western criminal law, criminology. I'm going to use that as a segue into an area that for decades, in a way, I've been studying, but not very seriously, until the last decade and a half. And beginning with, my first article was 1980, so I guess, but not 1889 in the early 90s, and that is the age-crime relationship, and responding especially to Hershey and Gottfried's notion of an invariant, universal age-crime distribution. An age-crime distribution that looks like this, okay? And that's their definition. That's a definition widely endorsed within criminology. It's a version of the age crime distribution that's become very popular within things like developmental criminology and biology and the teen brain notion, trying to explain that. Now, other people have other definitions of it. We're going to get to those. But I put up here, they're 1983, and most of you have read it. It's their assertion, this quote, you can find a lot of quotes from it, and it's repeated frequently in their writings, and it's repeated over and over in their most recent book. So keep that in mind, and turn to the next page, PowerPoint. A prominent influence, really underpinnings, the cornerstone is set. And so I put up here the major tenets, always and everywhere, 15 to 19 age group, the highest rate of crime. A rapid rise to early peak, rapid decline. Now, I'll emphasize that too much, but it's pretty core. High prevalence rate, majority of teens commit crime. So I've made a major effort, and with colleagues, some of whom are here, who've been working with the age crime students at Penn State. I'm still working with some of them. And so that will be the first part of what we're going to talk about, the age crime curve, wish number 2. So we'll jump to that. So I'm going to liven it up a little bit with Lucy. And so Lucy catching a fly ball, I got it can mean a lot of things. And we all know that in criminology. And so I have here, what are some of the obstacles that we face, that I spent a lot of time struggling with and dealing with, and lots of correspondence. Scarcity of data, which is always a big issue. But it's much more than that. It's how we define things and what do we mean? Where's the clarity? And so defining crime, our dependent variable, wow, it's law breaking, but it's also antisocial behavior, risky, harmful, dysfunctional, almost anything you might want to add. So it gets pretty hard to put your arms around it. The other thing is defining invariance. Lots of people cite Hershey and Gottfredson and say this is consistent with. So is it just 15 to 19, what many say? 15 to 24, does that count as an invariant curve? 15 to 29, 15 to 34? I've seen them all used many times. Very young, the elderly versus ages in, let's say ages in between. Some reviewers commented, it goes up and it comes down. What's the big deal? And then adolescent rise, post-adolescent decline. Decline can be fast or slow. Is there an early peak? And so if it, anyway, that's second to the Hershey-Gottfredson. That's probably the most common. Now, I put up here just to test what you think. This is a recent one. Look at the caption on top if you can read it. Does this fit the Hershey-Gottfredson invariant curve? Well, the peak age, you look at it, is in the mid to late 30s. The rate is higher at age 45 to 49 than at 20 to 24. So it's the definitional issue is huge. Then we ask, what say Hershey and Gottfredson about these definitions? They reject them. Their 220 book is very harsh about these wrong definitions. And so in it, we have, this is one of many quotes in it, the most striking characteristic, rapidity of the decline from the peak age. Then the next line, decline in crime is not gradual, it is dramatic. Rates of the great bulk of crimes have fallen to half their peak by age 35. So, I put up here, Jesse will put it up, the next one, fast up and rapid fast down. Now, I've tried to insert some of this, but I'm not, so the next one page should have a little caption there at top there. If you go back and read Hershey and Gottfredson's 1983 article, the data they use come from 2 countries and 2 centuries, England and the US. England in 19th century or 17th to 19th, and the US the 20th century. So what I'm going to give a hopefully quick sampling of some of the research that I've been doing or we've been doing as colleagues, and we're having pretty good success now pulling together a fair amount of historical and cross-national data. And some of these are under review and so on. We're working on them. And so I'm just going to run through these quickly, okay? We have to do them quick. So I'm going to show the next one. We have, I forgot to mention that Hershey and Gottfredson in their article say that other sources, and they cite these sources, support their conclusions. So with Jesse in particular, we've gone back and tracked down those sources. And so we can take a look at them. And I'll just give you a kind of one bare sampling of it to give you some sense. Look at this one here. Some of those sources had age by gender. So this is just to show you the kind of hodgepodge that is there in those 17 to 19 century countries relative to Hershey and Gottfredson's Matterhorn figure we presented earlier. And I just leave it there, okay? We'll move on to the next one, okay? Now, the next one is from an article with colleagues that was mentioned earlier. The one on, no, this is not. This is another one we published recently, Age and Crime in Taiwan by Age and Gender. And you see here, and we find a similar thing in a couple of other countries, okay? So I don't really have to tell you what it is. It's basically males and females from the same country, US and Taiwan, have similar age curves. And I think that's explainable. Between countries, dissimilarity. So if you compare between countries, males and females have very different age curves than they do in the other country. And in both, whatever you look at, Taiwan age curves are much less peaked and much older than those in the US, and especially the HG invariant premise. Then we go to the next one, and I see I have these upside down, but that's okay. Really like this one. It's this one we've recently completed, but we've been able to round up age homicide curves for the 19th century. And some people think homicide is the only reliable indicator of crime. And secondly, that it's the best indicator of a nation's crime rate. I don't know if that's so, but that's an argument. So we put up here New York City, Durkheim's 1987 in his book Suicide, Sri Lanka, and then from Quaitalay, who many of you know because he's often cited, sometimes not correctly, but he's cited, and where the age curve for homicide, the peak's around 27, 28. So I put these up here, and they're all, age curves are basically all in their 30s, low 30s to mid 30s in all those other countries, all these other things. So, not done yet, one final one. I have spent a lot of time trying to find for homicide, age homicide, data from as many countries as I can. Age homicide data are much more available, and so a lot of data are available. The countries have it. Will they give it to you is another problem, and you can spend a great deal of time trying to get it, and then things go haywire. So, but I put this up here. So this is roughly 55 countries, and just give you a snapshot thing. The Americas, you look at it, much younger age homicide distributions. Be Central America, Latin America, South America, US, and Canada. And a lot of these countries are war-torn, drugs, gang violence, tremendous poverty, a tremendous social dislocation, rule of law is broken down. So if you kind of want to look at where would you find young age curves, well, you're more likely to find them in countries like that, whereas we would say lots of social disorganization. So, and I put here, if you go over and you go to Europe and then to the Africa and Asia, and you find much older curves that keep getting older. And if I could show you histograms, you'd be surprised at histograms for Europe and so on, where, and once you get up to about 20, 24, 25, the histograms hardly change, well into the 40s. Now, it may peak, in some cases, at 25 to 29, but those histograms, just barely move down. So, that's kind of stuff we're working on. And I've stopped there with that and moved to the next wish, which is nature versus nurture. And this has become a much bigger issue, especially since, I'd say, 1980s and so on, the revolution in brain science and gene research and so on. But is crime a social production or a biological production? And it's a difficult question. And I think I think I have tried to bring in the physical and biological, much as many people do in my research on age and gender. So, but there's a need, I think, as Sutherland did, to have people who, in some ways, take this on. And it's a big, big task. So the biggest traction of the Hershey-Gottfredson premise is in what I have up here. And this is a very popular one, especially as a policy perspective. Rapid rise, rapid fall as due to imbalance in the structure of the brain. So I put that, and we're going to show a little bit on that, and then we're going to move on. Okay, Jesse. So I like, Zitz is one of my favorite cartoons, comics. So I put up here two from him, and about being a teenager today. And I want you to think about cultural expectations that the teenager has and what the parent has that are age graded in our society. I certainly had them when I was raised on a farm in Iowa. We as teenagers were pretty awful. And we fit the Hershey-Gottfredson. But when I went to college, I found many didn't. And I can tell you, in many countries, it doesn't fit, okay? So I put up here, and then Zitz, so on. So we'll move on from there. You get the gist of it. Then I put up here something you see a lot, and this is my on the right side. Put that in there. And so put up here, Friedman writes a lot for the New York Times, a psychiatrist, and this is one of his quotes. Teen brains are hardwired. G. Stanley Hall in 204, who is kind of a modern day hero of some of this stuff. Teenagers, savage propensities, he talks about. Very different than reading Confucius, by the way, from China. A much tamer view of adolescence. So then I have here what a point trying to make here, social criminologist Walsh has a wonderful statement, I think, to help us think about this. There must be something temporarily that greatly increases the probability of crime. And so some of the approaches, and there are numerous teen brain approaches out there, not necessarily Steinberg's and so on, there are other ones. And this is what that's the mantra, the assumption they're making. So I put that up here, and I have here, this is at the core. You can see it where that peaks. Some have added another kind of provocative claim. Age 17 is the peak age. They've even gone beyond Hershey and Gottfredson. So we have here at the core of aberrant teenage behavior. So move on from that. Then to approach this, kind of blame it on Sutherland, see? But I asked the question, what would Sutherland say about some of these approaches, the defender of social causation? And how would he approach it? And I think first he would say, why the absence of a serious assessment within criminology? There are strong critiques in allied fields and from prominent neurobiological researchers. It's a difficult one to address. I've been trying to, it's over my head. So I'm working now with Callie Burt, who some of you know, who understands this stuff well. And we're trying to work together to get something out on it. We have some of this in the Taiwan article that I mentioned earlier. And I just put up just a couple of things that Sutherland would say, evidence-based. What are some caveats? Lots of contradictory findings in this. There are different teen brain theories. And a big one here that's become a major effort on our part, I say myself and colleagues, Jesse here, and so on, and that is prevalence. We have an assumption that prevalence rates are high among teens. Most are doing it, breaking the law, and so on. Well, if you look at the International Self-Report Study, those 25 nations there, prevalence rates are actually fairly low. If you look at monitoring the future, the last decade or so, they're pretty low. There are major longitudinal studies today. Delinquency was pretty rare. So now, to get variation, we use a broader definition. Look at South Korea and Taiwan and China, countries we have self-report data. It's very, very low. I look at the teenagers where I was raised in Iowa. It's a lot lower than it was back then. And you're actually kind of, boy, these kids are pretty conforming. So most teens, there's, I think, increasing evidence in many countries, and maybe even more and more so in this country, are at zero or near zero. So they say they did it once. Did you do it 2 times or 3 times or more? No, they haven't. And the percentages get to be very, very small who've done it more than 3 times. So then the last 2, there are more, I put up here, how do you get at this causally? Well, if you have longitudinal studies, you can have variables that measure this across that period. There are no such studies that do this with the teen brain. National Institute of Health has a big project, and they are looking at some of it. and I don't know all their findings, but I hear it, so far it hasn't shown much. I could be wrong, so I got to be careful. But there are numerous self-report studies, longitudinal, look at social factors. And they do a pretty decent job of explaining the rise and the fall in countries like the US. So Sutherland would just say, let's go have a beer after finding that. So that, and then Sutherland, I think, would also, if you ask Sutherland, what should we study or read? And I think he would say read Confucius, read Albert Bandura, who has a much different take on this than G. Stanley Paul did. And then he would say this book right here. Now, I don't know. This is one of the best books I've ever read. I read it more than once. I think it's the best book on adolescence that I've ever seen. It's a historical study by Schlegel and Berry of the human relations file, this mammoth anthropological data collection that was done. And they went back and they looked at adolescence. The only one of these conclusions they draw is cited a lot in the neurobiological literature. They talk about age and crime. The only one of these that's cited is the first one, and they shade it. They write that adolescence is universal in all societies, and they cite this. But they don't mention very robust in some, barely discernible in others. Issue of peer influence, very large in some societies, very small in others. Parent-family peer conflict, present in some, in most not. Then I like this last one. They tried to get at teen violence and antisocial behavior, and they conclude this right here. It's at similar or lower levels than adults, 20s and 30s. Life expectancy was low, keep in mind, in the majority of societies. And they also find low prevalence rates in most societies. Again, this is nothing else I have to say tonight. It's, man, go out, rush out and get this book and read it. Anyway, so there's that. Then I think Sutherland would ask, what societal characteristics influence the age-crime relation? And I think he would, that's a huge question, and one that when you write an article here, the editors want you to do, and they push you very hard. Well, you're a theorist, why don't you theorize about it? You should do that. And you feel like, well, I'm happy with the article the way it is. If you want somebody to do that, you go do it yourself or something. But you get that. So I have tried. It's very messy. Societies are complex, and they change. And it's hard to get but we've been trying to do it. And it's a big thing that probably one of the main things that I'm working on actually is this. So if you have suggestions, let me know. And I put up here, keep in mind in Sutherland's textbook, maximum age of crime is 18. Almost all of them said that. Lemert, other ones all say 18, but then they right away say based on US UCR data. And then you have what Sutherland said here, it varies. And he said variation could be explained by his theory, of course, okay? So I just put here adult youth integration, generational isolation, the two that were emphasized in the adolescent book that I mentioned earlier. And then I think there are others that could put in, but the big one I think that's oftentimes left out is in those ZITS columns and so on, collective cultural age-graded expectations. If you define adolescence as a period of timeout, routine should be that's a developmental task that's quite different than what a lot of societies have. And it's leave out whether it's good or bad, but it's a very different approach to it. And I'm going to get at that. Again, I got to use ZITS. And just think of how much you hear this. And Dad is saying you should ask for advice. I tell him, follow my dream, seize the day, break a few, whatever. I'd say, get in the game, wait and swing for the fences. Well, that's kind of our sense of what adolescence is about. And then we add a lot of social roles and identities, a dating culture and so on, so you have there's a lot of complexity and messiness in all human lives, and they are very much so among teenagers. And there are psychological, biological, sociological factors that contribute to that. But it's also the case, the question is not whether all of them in some way do, but what is primary. And so then that's the end of those wishes. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to blip through these next wishes till we get to number 9. And there'll be more, hopefully. I'll have time to put this all together for the write-up here. But let's move to number 4. 21st century, I think it's going to be the century of gender roles, about gender roles, and the organization of gender. Tremendous change here going on. And it'll have a big impact, I think, on lots of things that are our major concerns. For me, it'll area of interest I have, and I hope I have time to do some of it. But this will be huge, and all I can do now is just mention it and then move on. The next one is criminal justice systems worldwide. It's a very different world. It's a world that's going to be impacting us much more in your lives than my life, and it impacted mine a lot too. But lawmaking, administration of justice, my own area, criminal justice, let's say decision-making, or doing justice, all of these. But and I think we need an infrastructure that starts in our teaching with graduate and undergraduate students to begin to address these things. A seminar in which the students are required to take a country that's not their own and compare it to their native country. And something like, so, but that's that. Will they move on from there? The next one is crime opportunity. And one of my very favorite topics, and I've worked on it for quite many years, institutional sexism in the underworld, as some of you may have heard. I've worked on it with fellow grad students. I'm working with Pam now on it, trying to meld together sort of routine activity theory and crime opportunity as it comes through Sutherland and partly Merton and partly Lemert. And so the emphasis on relationships and networks and selection and capability, that's in many ways left out of the routine activity theory. Now, routine activity theory has become almost everything now with this conception of guardianship, but to integrate those. So that's one of the big things that I hope that, so I have a network up here of a drug network that I once studied. So that's that. Then the next one, and we're not going to have just a couple of things here, but data definition and measurement, the old bugaboo issue, I guess, but lots of obstacles to tackle here. But we need data, and we need clarity of definition. And we also, of course, definition and measurement, as Merton so well reminded us, go together. Then, and I want to thank Jesse again for finding some of these great shots to get this point across. Number 8, just, I hope it's not a cop-out, but I have 2 or 3 things that I'm torn amongst. And so I kind of see what I think I have settled, but if you have any suggestions, let me know. Then we move to wish number 9. And this is, I think, is teen crime was the focus of criminology, especially the last half in criminology. And I'm kind of making an argument, as much so, there should be more balance. It should be what? Adult crime. And I put up here another cartoon. Pickles is one of my favorite comics. And so where's the candy? You don't have to sneak it out of my purse, but stolen candy always tastes better. And I'm kind of playing down the seriousness here. But man, if you look at crime today, in the transnational, what goes on, I don't care if it's fentanyl or what it is, but it's hidden a lot, and some of it's not at all hidden, whereas teen crime is not hidden. It's just the surveillance of teens and so on, and a captive audience to study. And I've done some on it, so there. But if you think of ordinary crime, folk crime, middle-class crime, a couple of really great books out now trying to get at this, looking at fraud and theft, taking an edge, and then violence. We often forget about that. And so it's not that there isn't an age crime curve, and so they usually find it, just like values change over time, become more temperate, more prudent, you mellow out with age. Crime, so there is kind of 25, 30, maybe kind of peaking, but it drops, but not a whole lot in these studies. And, but you have to look for it. And instead of asking about shoplifting, you ask about employee theft or something else. Some studies on teenagers and people in their 20s in Germany now, I got a couple of them were sent to me. No difference between those in their 20s and the teens when you substitute the items a little bit. So all these things. But I had a list. Jesse, how are we going to get this on a page? The prevalence and seriousness of criminal gangs, organized crime groups, enterprises, networks, so on. You go on and on. And where are the teens? Or even in the early 20s? So it's certainly not saying don't study youth, but I think a better balance is needed. I think it's important for our research, our theory, our policy mission, and it's important, I think, for our teaching mission. And I think we need to create infrastructures within criminology to address both of those missions. And I have more to say on that, I hope. I'm going to put up one final H curve, and then we're essentially done, except for one more pick. It's a very good one, okay? So I put up here some of the research I've been involved in, and I didn't have time to get this all in. My language gets a little rough when I work on PowerPoint, some of these things. So I finally just caved in. But just corporate financial fraud, the peak age there, late 40s. You look at insurance fraud, that's in the more than 55 peak age kind of thing. And this was an interesting database that I stumbled across. The FBI brought 208 to 213 every week published their top 10 cases. And I saw it, and every Friday I make sure I read it. It was like a nice delight at 4 o'clock on Friday, get a glass of wine and read the weekly top 10. And so then I had some undergraduates and so on. We coded these, and I still haven't gotten around to writing it up, but there's a nice gender breakout with it and so on. And so this is what kind of a preliminary, and it's broken out by type of offense and so on. So I show here, the peak age is about 38. So you see it here. These could be anywhere from racketeering to violence, ransom kidnapping, and so on. And again, I think don't want to overemphasize the importance of adult crime, but there's a lot of it out there. And it'll be shaping the 21st century, I think, more than it has this century. And so on. Now, my last one here, are you ready? Hang on a minute, Jesse. One more. Okay. This is Mount Nittany in State College, Pennsylvania. A beautiful place, Happy Valley, but it's kind of like, compare this to the Matterhorn, and which one is really more like the real age crime distribution. I don't have an answer to it, I'm working on it. But I thank you for your patience and goodwill, and I hope I see you around at the meetings. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, you have a...
I just have to wrap things up, but you take your time. I want to thank you for a fantastic lecture. There's very few in criminology who can match the breadth and depth of Sutherland's research and knowledge and theory, and Darrell Steffensmeier is certainly one of those, so a very appropriate award winner for the Sutherland. Also want to congratulate again all of this year's award winners, future gods, all of them, mini gods, and to let you know that just outside to the right as you leave, there is an ASC backdrop, and we've got our photographer who's been wonderful taking pictures all night, has volunteered to take some more pictures of the award winners where probably less flop sweat and awkwardness of me, that we can do proper photographs with the backdrop if you would like to stick around and do that. And all of you are welcome to take selfies with the backdrop, pretend that you've won an award, imagine your future awards that you're going to be winning. And I think that covers everything. Thank you, everybody, for staying with us tonight, and have a great evening.